a wealthy business owner, disguised himself as a laborer to buy a truck from his own dealership. Sounds strange, doesn't it? But what froze him in place wasn't the price of the truck. It wasn't the service. It was the voice of a father, sitting at the next table, begging to hold on to his family's dream. Jason Carter sat in a worn-out Toyota Corolla, fingers lightly tapping the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the row of gleaming trucks in the lot. To outsiders, Carter's Trucks was a symbol of success, one of the fastest-growing truck showrooms in Oregon, where people lined up to purchase a piece of the American dream on 4 wheels. But only Jason knew something was rotting from within. For the past 6 months, while he had been busy expanding the operation into other states, quiet complaints had begun to surface. Customers spoke of hidden fees, of deceit, of feeling cornered right as they were about to sign the contract. Jason didn't want to believe it. He had spent 15 years of his life building this empire from nothing, starting with a rented lot and 3 used pickup trucks. He had always believed in one principle: if you treat customers with decency, they'll come back. And now, the very business he built might be betraying that trust. Jason wasn't the kind of CEO to act hastily. He needed to be sure. He needed the truth with his own eyes. So, this morning, instead of walking into the showroom in a suit and a shiny Mercedes, he threw on an old flannel shirt, left his face unshaven for 3 days, pulled a baseball cap low over his eyes, and went by the name Mike Thompson, a construction worker looking to buy a new truck. No one in the showroom recognized him. They just saw a regular guy walk in with $35,000 and the hope of finding a reliable truck. Jason didn't yet know. What he was about to uncover wouldn't just change the company, it would change who he was. Jason stepped out of the old Corolla, feigning a slight limp from a work injury, his gaze drifting aimlessly as if he hadn't quite made up his mind. Slung over his shoulder was a dusty backpack, and on his wrist, a cheap digital watch from a drugstore. He wasn't the CEO today. He was Mike, a construction worker who had just received his first big paycheck after months of hard work. And now, he wanted to invest in a brand new truck. A young employee quickly emerged from the glass lobby, wearing a smile so bright it bordered on unnatural. "Good morning. Sir, I'm Tom. What can I help you with today?" Jason shook his hand lightly, his voice raspier and pitched higher than usual. I'm Mike. I do construction up north, looking for a new truck to haul materials. My old one's about to give out." Tom's eyes lit up, not just at the sight of a potential customer, but at the scent of a deal. He promptly led Jason along the row of trucks. "For your line of work, I'd say the Ford F-150 or the Ram series would suit you best," Tom said with enthusiasm. "They're tough, durable, smooth engines. We just got a fresh batch in this week." Jason nodded and let Tom lead the way. But his eyes did more listening than his ears, watching which truck Tom chose to show first, what features he emphasized, and what details he conveniently skipped over. They stopped in front of a silver Ford F-150. It looked great, But Jason knew the sticker price on this model was nearly $39,000 higher than the $35,000 he had claimed to bring. "This one just came in a couple days ago," Tom said. "Still practically brand new. Comes with the Carter's protection package too, 5-year warranty, towing assistance, free oil changes." Jason's mind paused. That protection package was supposed to be optional. It should never be automatically included in the price. He had written that policy into the employee handbook himself back in year 3 of the company. He quietly suppressed a sigh and stayed in character. "Mind if I take a look under the hood? I don't know much about engines, but my brother's a heavy equipment mechanic. He says you can tell a lot about a truck from the engine." Tom smiled as he popped open the hood, but his eyes kept darting toward the large showroom window where Dan Reynolds, the sales manager, stood with arms crossed, staring intently in their direction. That look didn't resemble a manager casually watching his team. It was the look of a predator, waiting for the prey to step into the trap. Jason knew Dan had only recently been promoted, just a few months ago, while Jason had been busy expanding into neighboring states. He had never met Dan in person, only heard about him through a recommendation from a regional VP. And right now, Jason's first impression of Dan sent a chill down his spine. After taking the truck for a test drive around the lot, Jason nodded like a real customer ready to buy. "Not bad. Feels good. Should we go do the paperwork?" Tom lit up as if he'd struck gold and eagerly led Jason into the showroom. The air conditioning was a welcome contrast to the blistering summer heat outside. Jason took a seat, eyes scanning the pricing board, promotional flyers, and then back to Tom, who was busy typing on his computer. "What's your full name?" "Sir Mike. Mike Thompson." Tom hesitated slightly as he read off the pricing sheet. Base price is $37,000 plus the protection package and processing fee." "Processing fee," Jason cut in, still keeping his voice rough and unpolished. Before Tom could answer, a choked voice came from the table beside them. "That's not right. My wife and I budgeted every cent. We've been saving for 2 years to buy this truck. You promised us $32,000. How did it suddenly become $35,000? Jason froze. That voice, that desperation, he'd heard it before from his own father, 25 years ago, in a showroom where they were scammed and left with nothing. And this time, Jason knew he was about to touch a truth far uglier than a few bad online reviews. He tilted his head slightly, pretending to keep reading the price sheet. But every sense in him was on high alert, ears stretched tight, eyes slowly shifting toward the man who had spoken. He stood beside the opposite table, stocky build, faded red t-shirt with the logo of a local delivery company. His hands gripped a stack of papers so tightly the veins bulged like cables. A small photo slipped from the middle of the folder, 3 kids beaming around a birthday cake. Jason swallowed hard. "My wife and I counted every dollar," the man said, voice trembling. "Our oldest daughter's starting college this fall. We need this truck to keep our delivery job, or there won't be tuition money for her." The man's name was Mark Henderson. Jason saw it printed in the top corner of the auto loan papers. And across the room, Dan Reynolds made his entrance, no more watching from afar. Dan stepped out of his office in a tailored suit, hair slicked back with gel, a polite smile pasted across his face, but his eyes were cold as steel. "I understand you're frustrated," Dan said, voice firm but rehearsed. "But all fees are clearly outlined in the fine print of the contract. Market adjustment fee, mandatory warranty, premium service package. These are all standard parts of our financing process." Jason's brow tightened. Market adjustment fee, mandatory warranty package. These were terms Jason had never approved in any version of the company's sales policy. Mark's reaction was immediate, raw. "But Josh, the salesman, told me the final price would be $32,000. Now it's suddenly $35,000. He guaranteed it to me." Dan didn't blink. "Josh is no longer with us, Mr. Henderson. And you should remember, verbal agreements don't carry the same weight as the contract you signed." He tapped the contract folder with a perfectly manicured fingernail. Jason leaned in slightly. The signing date was this morning. The ink still looked fresh. "You should have read it more carefully," Dan said smoothly. "If there's anyone to blame, it's yourself for being too trusting." Mark looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Please, we've been planning this purchase for months. My old truck's nearly dead. I need a new one to keep making deliveries. If I lose this job, my daughter won't be going to college." Dan crossed his arms, a glint of disdain flickering in his eyes. "So, you've got two options. Pay the extra amount by the end of the week, or we cancel the order. But per the terms of the contract, you'll lose your $5,000 deposit." Jason felt a bitter tightness rise in his throat. $5,000 that could very well be this family's entire savings. And now, Mark had to either come up with another $3,000 they didn't have, or walk away with nothing. "This is fraud," Mark stammered, his voice cracking, nearly in tears. "I'm going to report this. I'll call the dealership owner. I'll call the Consumer Protection Agency." Dan leaned in, whispering with a voice like venom. "Go ahead. But between a delivery guy's word and the manager of $1 million dealership, who do you think they'll believe?" Jason's hand tightened on the armrest, fingernails digging into the plastic. He knew that look, that voice. It was the same way his father had been pushed out of a showroom 25 years ago. He had once sworn that he'd never let that happen to any customer under his name. And now, it was happening, right in front of him. And if Dan dared to do that in the middle of the showroom, in front of everyone, how many other victims had there been, hidden behind closed doors? That Jason had never known about Tom turned to Jason, clearly shaken by what he had just witnessed. "So, shall we move forward with the paperwork, Mr. Thompson?" Jason took a deep breath. "Hold on. I want to review the fee sheet again, line by line, every single charge. I don't want to end up like that man." Tom nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he began pulling up the itemized pricing list. Meanwhile, Jason glanced over at Mark, the man walking away with crumpled papers in hand and a hollow, defeated look in his eyes. And Jason knew the investigation had just officially begun. He sat quietly for a moment, watching Mark's figure disappear out of the showroom. His shoulders slumped as if he were carrying the weight of his entire family's disappointment. A wave of anger and sorrow surged in Jason's chest. He was no longer just a boss on an undercover mission. Now, he was a witness, and he had a responsibility to act. He turned to Tom, the young salesman, still nervously typing out the updated pricing sheet. "Hey, Tom." Jason lowered his voice, trying to keep a calm tone. "Are you sure? Those same fees are going to show up in my contract too." Tom looked up, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. His eyes darted quickly toward Dan's office, then dropped back down. "Mr. Thompson, to be honest, I probably shouldn't be saying this." Jason sat up straighter, pretending to be just another curious customer, but in his mind, he had already triggered the voice recording feature on the phone tucked into his shirt pocket. Tom swallowed hard. "Mr. Reynolds, he has this process. Let the customer get excited and then spring the fees at the last minute. The protection package, market fee, extended warranty. They all have different names, but they're really just there to pressure people." Jason nodded slightly, encouraging Tom to keep going with a steady, supportive look in his eyes. If a salesperson doesn't follow the script like Josh, the guy Mr. Henderson just mentioned, they get their shifts changed. Tom whispered. "They get stuck working dead hours when no one comes to buy cars. No customers means no sales, and no money." Tom craned his neck to scan the room, then lowered his voice even more. Josh pushed back. He said we should be transparent with customers. A few days later, he was fired. Jason could feel it. The truth wasn't just about one bad manager. It was an entire system, a calculated, predatory structure designed to deceive. Just then, a young couple walked into the showroom. Jason turned his head slightly to avoid drawing attention, but his eyes followed them. Another salesman quickly approached, greeting them with a rehearsed smile and ushering them toward the biggest truck in the corner of the room. Same routine, the pitch focused on emotions, your dream truck. Something you'll be proud to drive home, but not a single word about the final cost. Jason rose from his seat. "I'm going to use the restroom. Need a moment to think things over." Tom nodded quickly, as if grateful for the brief reprieve from pressure. Jason used the moment to scan the entire showroom. He walked slowly through each section, his eyes sweeping across signing tables, the expressions on customers' faces, and the subtle cues in the body language of the staff. He overheard a quiet exchange between two employees. That guy yesterday was so happy, signed everything without realizing he got hit with the Premium Plus package. Cancellation windows closed. Even if he complains now, it's too late. Jason stopped in his tracks. That was outright fraud. He moved on to the customer waiting area. A young farmer holding a cup of coffee leaned toward his friend. "They said the price adjustment fee was some new state regulation. I looked it up online. Couldn't find a thing." An elderly couple, their hair silver white, whispered between themselves. "They said we were getting a discount, but it turns out that was just a trick to tack on some other service fee." Jason made his way back, heart heavy. He glanced up at the wall lined with plaques awards for outstanding customer service, which now felt like nothing more than polished masks hiding a machine that drained trust from anyone who walked through the door. On his way back, Jason stopped by the coffee machine. From there, he spotted Dan standing in the middle of a small group of fresh-faced new employees. Dan was holding court like a self-proclaimed sales guru. Remember this, customers don't know what they need until we tell them, and they don't know the real value until we show them how to stretch their budget. The group laughed, some genuinely, others with forced, uneasy chuckles. Jason felt a chill crawl down his spine. This isn't a truck dealership anymore. It's a training ground for manipulators. He returned to Tom's desk. That protection package, is it really mandatory? Tom hesitated. Technically, no. But if a customer refuses it, then suddenly their financing paperwork has issues, or the value of their trade-in just drops out of nowhere. Jason was beginning to see the full picture, a carefully woven web, where every thread from pricing to staff to customer experience was manipulated to serve one thing: greed. And at the center of that web sat Dan Reynolds, the giant spider perched amid his traps, spinning threads of deceit and coercion. Jason took a deep breath. Now he had data, he had evidence, he had confessions, but he knew to cut this out at the root, he needed one more thing: a confession straight from Dan's own mouth. As the showroom gradually emptied and the late afternoon sun streamed through the glass windows, casting long streaks of light across the polished tile floor, Jason knew the time had come. He returned to Tom's desk, his gaze calm but firm. "Before I sign anything, I'd really like to speak with the manager, Dan Reynolds." "Right." Tom hesitated, lowering his voice a bit. I can ask, but he usually only comes out if he thinks a sale's about to fall through." Jason gave a slight, knowing smile. "Then tell him I'm hesitating because of the fees." Tom nodded and quickly made his way toward Dan's office. From where he sat, Jason could clearly see the exchange through the frosted glass. Dan looked up, frowned briefly, then slipped on his familiar fake smile. He nodded and motioned Tom to send the customer in. Dan's office looked like a miniature showroom of artificial authority. A glossy dark wood desk, high-end leather chairs. The bookshelf behind him was filled with books that had clearly never been opened, a few framed family photos for effect, and on the desk a contract already printed, with just a few blanks left for the customer to sign. "Mr. Thompson." "Is it?" Dan extended a hand, voice smooth as silk. "Tom said you had a few concerns. Happy to assist." Jason shook his hand, deliberately applying a little more pressure, a subtle move Dan didn't expect. "Yes, I'm not great with paperwork, but after what I saw at that other table, I'll admit it gave me some pause." Dan chuckled, not a laugh of humor, but the kind that comes from someone used to being in control. "You're sharp. Not everyone catches things like that." He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "To be honest," Dan said, This place isn't just about selling trucks. We're selling dreams. People don't come in here for engines, they come for a feeling, the feeling of leveling up. Jason kept his tone grounded. But if people are lured into paying more than they really can afford, isn't that just fraud? Dan folded his arms, tilted his head slightly, and squinted at Jason like he was sizing him up. Fraud? No. It's just capitalizing on emotion. They walk in here riding a high. Our job is to steer them toward the right decision. And sometimes, the right decision doesn't mean the cheapest. Jason kept his face expressionless. But under the table, his fingers had already triggered a second voice recording. So, those fees, they're not actually mandatory. Dan smiled, lifting a contract and flipping through a few pages. On paper, no. But in practice, if someone refuses the protection package, well, their financing might hit a snag, or their trade-in might suddenly get appraised lower. No one's really at fault. It's just the system. He gave a sly wink. Jason said nothing. The trap was open. Now it was time to draw the spider deeper inside. So, let's say I want that package gone. Is there a way? Dan leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. You're a smart man, Dan said smoothly, with a little off-the-record payment. I can adjust a few things on that contract. Jason felt his blood boil. A bribe, clear, brazen, and now recorded. And does Mr. Carter, the owner, know about this? Jason asked, keeping his voice deliberately naive. Dan burst into laughter, as if Jason had just told a joke. Him, Carter's a ghost, off expanding into other states, counting money all day. I run this place, and trust me, no one's ever dared report anything. Anyone who does, well, they tend to disappear off the payroll real fast. Jason stared at Dan, the man who was now basking in his own arrogance, completely unaware he had just signed his own confession. I heard. You're actually making more than Carter himself. Dan nodded, full of pride. I generate profits he wouldn't even dream of questioning. And Carter, he likes to believe he's some good guy, living in a clean little world. Jason leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Maybe you're underestimating Mr. Carter a little too much. Dan raised an eyebrow. What do you mean by that? Jason stood up. His voice dropped into its true register, deep, commanding, cold as steel. Because you're looking at Carter. Jason. Carter. He pulled off the cap, stood tall, and locked eyes with a gaze like fire. The silence in Dan's office thickened instantly. His face turned ghostly pale, like every drop of blood had drained out. His eyes widened and froze. His spine curled inward, as if the man he had mocked as a clueless hick had just transformed into a force of power he couldn't possibly resist. You're Jason Carter. Jason nodded, eyes never leaving Dan. That's right. And you just confessed to multiple acts of fraud, coercion, bribery, and staff manipulation, all caught on the phone recording in my shirt pocket. Dan lurched to his feet, stumbling, hand reaching out toward his computer. I can explain. It's not what you think. Dan stammered, panic overtaking his voice. Jason stepped around the desk, lifting his hand, his voice sharp, resolute, like forged steel. "Touch that computer one more time, and I'll be adding destruction of evidence to your list of charges." Dan froze in place, like he'd been turned to stone. Without hesitation, Jason moved to the showroom sound system control panel and pressed the intercom button. "All employees, please report to the main lobby emergency meeting. No one is to leave the building." His voice echoed through the ceiling speakers, ringing through the showroom like an alarm bell. Within minutes, they began to gather people from finance, sales staff, technicians, even the security guard, faces filled with confusion, exchanging puzzled looks. No one knew what was happening. Then Jason stepped out of Dan's office into the center of the lobby. He removed his disguise completely. The face that most of them had only seen on posters or internal emails now stood right in front of them, real, commanding, and filled with fury. "If anyone here hasn't met me before, I'm Jason Carter, the owner of this dealership." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Wide eyes. Whispers began murmuring from the back. Jason raised his hand. The room fell silent. "Today, I came in disguise as a customer to investigate what's been keeping me up at night. And what I discovered was worse than anything I ever imagined." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and switched it to speaker mode. The recording from Dan's office began to play his own voice, loud and damning, scamming customers by inflating prices at the last minute, pressuring employees to comply or be pushed out, accepting bribes to remove fees from contracts, and boasting that Mr. Carter is too busy counting money to know what's going on. Each sentence echoed through the room like a blade slicing through trust. Jason scanned the crowd. Some employees stared at the floor in shame. Some were teary-eyed, and others exhaled deeply as if, finally, the truth had found its way into the light. "If anyone here hasn't met me before, I'm Jason Carter, the owner of this dealership." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Wide eyes. Whispers began murmuring from the back. Jason raised his hand. The room fell silent. "Today, I came in disguise as a customer to investigate what's been keeping me up at night, and what I discovered was worse than anything I ever imagined." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and switched it to speaker mode. The recording from Dan's office began to play his own voice, loud and damning, scamming customers by inflating prices at the last minute, pressuring employees to comply or be pushed out, accepting bribes to remove fees from contracts, and boasting that Mr. Carter is too busy counting money to know what's going on. Each sentence echoed through the room like a blade slicing through trust. Jason scanned the crowd. Some employees stared at the floor in shame, some were teary-eyed, and others exhaled deeply as if, finally, the truth had found its way into the light. "All of your computer data will be backed up for investigation," Jason declared. "If you delete even a single file, the consequences will be in the hands of criminal attorneys, not me." Dan's eyes bulged as he took a step back, muttering, You're destroying your own business." Jason met his gaze, calm but unyielding. "I'd rather lose money than lose the trust of my employees and customers." As Dan was escorted out of the showroom, a sudden round of applause broke out, beginning quietly in the corner, where Mark Henderson stood, still holding his wrinkled folder, eyes red. "I only came back to ask for my deposit," Mark said softly. "But maybe I got more than that." Jason stepped toward him, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not just getting your money back," he said. "You're getting that truck at the original price. And an apology from the bottom of my heart." After that explosive meeting, Carter's Trucks was never the same. The glass walls that once reflected the confusion of pressured buyers now reflected light from brand new digital displays, real prices, real fees. Every detail crystal clear down to the last dollar. Jason immediately set to work on a full-scale reform. The first step established the Transparency Task Force. He brought in independent financial experts and moved the entire sales process onto a public-facing system. A massive LED screen was installed in the showroom, displaying truck prices, all additional fees if any, and current promotions. No more shady pricing, no more last-minute charges. On the front door, he hung a new slogan: clarity, honesty, trust. The second step audit every contract from the past 6 months. Jason, alongside a team of auditors, spent countless days and nights combing through every single contract line by line, fee by fee, freshly added stamp by stamp. Every customer who had been overcharged received a personal phone call directly from Jason Carter. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame Dan. He didn't blame the system. He only said one thing: "We got it wrong, and I'm here to make it right." The third step, reinstating the good. One Saturday morning, while reviewing files, Jason received a text. Josh, the guy who got fired, is now driving trucks for another dealership in the neighboring state. Without hesitation, Jason picked up the phone. Josh was stunned when the voice on the other end turned out to be Jason himself inviting him back, this time with a new title, Head of Sales Training. "I want my new team to learn how to sell trucks through trust," Jason told him, "not fear." On his first day back, Josh stood on a small stage in the meeting room. "We don't just sell trucks," he said. "We build trust. If a customer leaves here feeling unsure, then no matter how many deals we close today, they won't be back tomorrow." For the first time, applause rang out, not for a sale, but for a value returned. Then, something unexpected happened. Tom, the young salesman who had bravely spoken up, walked into Jason's office holding a thick folder. I've been keeping records of every shady transaction for the past 3 months," he said. "Customer names, signing dates, added fees. I couldn't stop it. But at least I held on to the proof." Jason was speechless. He hadn't expected that, not from a rookie. "My dad used to say, doing the right thing doesn't need applause. But if you don't do it, your conscience won't let you sleep." Jason stood up and looked Tom in the eye. "Would you like to lead a new department for me? The Customer Relations Division dedicated to protecting the rights of every buyer." Tom's mouth dropped open. Then he nodded for the first time, without fear in his eyes when facing the boss. But Jason didn't stop at fixing the past. He launched a scholarship named after Mark Henderson's daughter, the man most deeply hurt by the old system. The scholarship was for children of customers facing hardship, but who showed determination and grit. I've seen the look in a father's eyes when he can't protect his child's dream. I won't let that happen again. From what started as a shocking exposé, Carter's Trucks began to transform, becoming a model for the entire industry. The media covered it extensively. The owner who went undercover to save his own company. But Jason stayed out of the spotlight. He offered just one short quote in a single interview: "We once lost trust. Now it's time we learn how to truly deserve it." Just weeks after that historic day at the showroom, Carter's Trucks, once a name tainted with suspicion, was now being spoken of as a symbol of redemption in an industry long plagued by shadows. No more hidden fees, no more financial traps, no more psychological games that pushed customers into signing out of fear. Instead, the showroom was now filled with light, laughter, and transparency. Former customers returned not to complain, but to say thank you. An elderly man with silver hair gently led his wife to the front desk and whispered to the receptionist, "I once swore I'd never set foot in here again. But yesterday, I got a call from Mr. Carter himself. Honestly, he did something I never thought possible in business. A young man who had once walked away after bogus fees were added to his loan came back with his younger brother, saying, 'This time, I know I'll be treated like a human being, not just a walking wallet.' The reputation grew, but not through advertising. Jason declined every TV interview request. He accepted no sponsorships. He spent nothing on rebranding campaigns. Instead, he let former customers like Mark Henderson become the unofficial spokespeople. Mark returned to the showroom multiple times, not to buy a truck, but to sit with the new staff, sip coffee, and share his experience. One day, he looked at Jason and said, "I used to think that truck was just a vehicle, but now I see it was the bridge that got my daughter to her college dream. And you didn't just give me my money back. You gave me back trust." Jason launched Community Thank You Day, not to sell, but to listen. The dealership lot transformed into a mini fair, free food, live music, games for kids. No one was pushed to buy a truck. No one mentioned sales numbers. Jason walked around, coffee cup in hand, chatting with every guest as if he were just another staff member. In one corner of the lot, he spotted Tom, the young employee who once trembled under Dan's gaze, now confidently walking an elderly couple through a vehicle. No rush, no pressure tactics. Tom was explaining every feature, every fee, with care and clarity. The wife beamed. The husband nodded with quiet satisfaction. Jason stood still for a moment, smiling. This is the Carter's Trucks I always dreamed of. But the change didn't stop within his walls. It rippled through the industry. Neighboring dealerships began revising their own processes. Some even modeled themselves after Carter's Trucks' transparency initiative. A local newspaper ran a headline, "From a place that lost trust to a beacon of integrity," And when asked why he didn't take Dan to court, Jason simply said, "I don't need to drag anyone down. I just need to rebuild a place where people can walk in and know they won't be deceived." One late afternoon, after a long but fulfilling day, Jason stood at the large glass window of the showroom, arms folded across his chest. The sunset bathed the truck lot in golden light. Rows of trucks stood in quiet formation, no longer financial traps, but now symbols of a promise. We sell trust, not fear. As night settled in and the showroom lights gradually dimmed, Jason walked slowly past the silent rows of trucks resting under the lot's floodlights. A soft breeze carried the scent of fresh rubber, the crisp tang of new paint. But deep in his chest rose another scent, the fragrance of memory, the dust of old highways, the sweat of a 25-year-old summer afternoon. In that moment, he felt 13 again. That afternoon, his father, Ronald Carter, had taken young Jason to a dealership, hoping to trade in their old, near-broken-down pickup. His dad had spent 2 years saving. They chose a beat-up blue truck, nothing fancy, but it would do. The salesman smiled wide, reassuring. "Just sign here, and you're good to go." No one explained the fees. No one mentioned the binding clauses. And then, after the contract was signed, a sudden market adjustment fee appeared. Jason's father couldn't afford the extra charge. They lost the deposit, lost the truck, lost their trust in people. That night, Jason heard his father cry for the first time in his life out in the garage, thinking his son was already asleep. That feeling of helplessness, it never left Jason, and it was in that moment that Carter's Trucks was born. Not from a passion for business, but from a boy who had watched his father be deceived and made a silent vow. One day, I'll build a place where people don't have to wear suits to be treated with respect. Jason stepped into his office, now no longer a secluded space of untouchable authority, but a simple desk on the showroom floor, where any employee could walk up, talk, and offer ideas. He opened a drawer. Inside was an old photo of his father standing beside a pickup truck, hand on teenage Jason's shoulder, grinning wide. Next to it, a worn wooden plaque, hand-painted with words that had guided him from the very beginning: "Trust is earned, one honest deal at a time." That was the sign his father once hung in the small garage behind their house, the place where he patched tires and changed oil for free, serving the neighborhood for over 20 years. Jason mounted that same wooden sign on the new wall of the team meeting room, where every employee could see it, every single day. And in that moment, he finally understood Carter's Trucks wasn't just a business that needed saving. It was a legacy, a bridge between past and future, a living promise that even when old-fashioned values are called naive, someone can still choose to live by them, unapologetically. He returned to his desk, opened his laptop, and began writing handwritten letters to every past customer affected by Dan's actions. No templates, no scanned signatures. Just one man, a business owner, writing to each person who had once placed their trust in his company. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm here now, and I promise it will never happen again. One Saturday morning, as golden sunlight poured over the rows of trucks in the lot, the new sign for Carter's Trucks shone brighter than ever. Beneath the familiar motto, clarity, honesty, trust, was a newly added subtitle, because your story matters. Today wasn't about sales, no promotions, no quotas. Today was Customer Appreciation Day, the first major event since the dealership's transformation after the scandal. The entire truck lot had been turned into a community fair, free burger stands. A local live band playing cheerful country tunes. Children racing around with tiny truck-shaped balloons. A special booth with a sign that read, "Ask us anything about pricing, no runaround." Jason wasn't on a stage. He wore a simple polo shirt, holding a coffee cup, walking from table to table, shaking every hand. And in one quiet corner of the lot, a small but powerful moment unfolded. An elderly couple, Mr. Walter and Mrs. Edna, stood in front of a deep blue truck. Tom, the young salesman who once trembled under Dan's shadow, was now walking them through every detail: engine power, fuel efficiency, maintenance schedule, and every single fee handwritten on a large A4 sheet, not skipping a single line. Edna smiled, squeezing her husband's hand. I like how he said, "If it doesn't make sense, I'll explain it slower. It's not like the old days of selling." Walter nodded. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I need to wear a suit just to be treated with respect. From a short distance away, Jason overheard the exchange, and he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be for exactly the right reason. A little while later, Mark Henderson appeared, holding a small sign, "The Henderson Scholarship for your child's college dream." Jason shook Mark's hand. Two men, once buyer and owner, once on opposite ends of a broken deal, now stood side by side, like friends sharing a purpose. "My daughter, she's officially started college," Mark said, voice thick with emotion. "And she knows it's because one man heard a cry for help, not with his head, but with his heart." At the end of the day, Jason stepped onto a small platform not to deliver a speech, but to share a single message. Thank you for giving us a second chance. Carter's Trucks isn't perfect, but starting today, we'll do one good thing every day, for every customer, in every sale, because you deserve it, and because we want to deserve you. The lot erupted in applause, but it wasn't the thunderous kind from the day Dan was exposed. This was soft, steady, like a quiet nod from the heart. That night, after the last guest had gone, Jason sat alone on the steps in front of the showroom. The light from the dealership sign reflected off the truck windows, twinkling like tiny stars. Carter's Trucks, a dealership that nearly crumbled under the weight of betrayal in the dark, was now stepping into a new era. No gimmicks, no sales tactics, just honesty and the courage to make things right. 1 week after Customer Appreciation Day, the Carter's Trucks showroom returned to its regular rhythm, but the atmosphere was no longer the same. Gone was the quiet tension between employees and management. Gone was the fearful silence whenever someone asked, "What's this fee for?" Now, every salesperson proudly held up the contract and said, "Here's the full breakdown. If there's anything you don't understand, we'll go over it line by line." Jason no longer had to wear a disguise to understand what was happening inside. He walked the showroom simply as himself, a grounded owner, present in the right place, at the right time. One morning, Tom, now head of customer relations, stepped into Jason's office with a young woman, about 20 years old. By his side, "Mr. Carter," Tom said. "I want to introduce someone. This is Grace, marketing student, and a new recipient of the Henderson Scholarship." The young woman shyly extended her hand, but her eyes held a quiet, steady confidence. "I grew up with my dad fixing trucks," the young woman said softly. "We used to think we'd never even be able to step into a dealership like this. But the other day, when I heard someone here say, 'Customers don't need to be rich, they just need to be real,' I knew I wanted to work at a place like this." Jason smiled. "Well then, would you like to intern here this summer? Not to learn how to sell trucks, but to learn how to keep your word." She nodded, her eyes bright like a seed just planted into fertile soil. That afternoon, Jason walked toward the old warehouse behind the showroom, the place where he first began. With 3 used trucks and a second-hand coffee machine. He opened the weathered door. The lingering scent of old motor oil hung in the air, not unpleasant, but grounding, reminding him of the most honest days of his life. In one corner, an old whiteboard stood propped against the wall. The lettering was faded with time, but still legible. "Customers don't buy trucks. They buy trust." Jason stood silently for a moment. Then he picked up a fresh marker and retraced the faded words on the whiteboard. But this time, he added a second line beneath it. "And you can only sell what you truly carry in your heart." The next day, as the new team of employees gathered, Jason didn't speak as a CEO, he spoke as someone who had walked the path before them. "I won't be here forever. But this culture, it's yours to keep alive. I don't need someone who sells 10 trucks a week by cutting corners. I need someone who sells 3 and brings those 3 customers back with their friends, their family, and their trust." He turned to Josh, the man who was once fired, now the head trainer, and gave him a nod. Josh understood. He stepped forward and clicked to the first slide in the onboarding session for this new generation of salespeople. It didn't read closing techniques or upsell strategy. It held only one line: "Honesty is the strongest sales tool you will ever own." And when the meeting wrapped, Jason stepped outside, standing beneath the Carter's truck sign where the setting sun lit up the word trust like a gentle reminder in gold. He knew then that the legacy he was building no longer lived in spreadsheets or sales targets. It lived in the hearts of those carrying the values forward. Carter's Trucks, once a dealership on the brink of collapse due to greed, had become a beacon in an industry often clouded by suspicion. Not because they did anything extraordinary, but because they made the choice to begin again, with the simplest acts of decency. 6 months after Jason Carter returned to his own showroom in disguise, he sat at a wooden table in a small cafe near the dealership across from Mark Henderson. Mark wore a clean, pressed shirt. His hands no longer shook. The truck he'd bought at the exact price he was promised now provided steady work and enough income to send his daughter to college. "I never thought I'd say this," Mark said, his eyes shining. "But that truck changed my life. Not just because it runs well, but because it's proof that some people still keep their word." Jason sat quietly for a moment, then smiled softly. "I never thought. One day I'd be thanking someone who was once deceived in my own showroom," Jason said with a quiet smile. They clinked their coffee mugs not to celebrate, but because they both understood some cracks exist, so the light can get in. That day, when Jason returned to the showroom, he witnessed a moment that stopped him in his tracks. A 10-year-old boy, wearing a Carter's Trucks t-shirt, stood beside his father, pointing at a truck and asking Dad, "Do we have to buy anything extra?" The father bent down, smiling gently. "No, son. Here, they tell you everything up front. No one's trying to trick us." Nearby, Tom, now the customer experience manager, smiled quietly and handed over the contract. No fine print, no hidden lines, just a simple agreement between one human and another. Jason stood still for a while. He didn't step in, he didn't have to, because that moment was everything Jason had ever hoped for when he founded Carter's Trucks. That night, he returned to his office and hung a new photo on the wall taken during Customer Appreciation Day, with a single line beneath it: "The real profit is trust." Then he locked up and stepped outside. The night air was cool and calm. The dealership sign still glowed brightly against the sky. Clarity, honesty, trust. But now, that light wasn't just from bulbs. It was the glow of doing the right thing, the right way. And if you watching this video have ever been hurt by an unfair system, if you've ever lost faith in the very people who were supposed to protect you, then please remember this. You, by standing up, speaking out, and refusing to accept what's wrong, can be the reason a place becomes better. Because maybe you're not the owner, but you still have the power to make the owner listen. If this story touched you, reminded you what it means to see the truth hiding in the very place you built yourself, and showed you that sometimes just one person brave enough to stand up is enough to change an entire system. If you've ever believed that kindness is weakness, let this be your reminder. Trust, when protected to the end, is always stronger than any lie. Share this video, because somewhere out there, someone might be searching for one reason, just one, to start making things right again.